You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.
Welcome to Smart Sex, Smart Love. Where talking about sex goes beyond the taboos and talking about love goes beyond the honeymoon. I'm Dr. Joe Court. Thanks for tuning in. All right, today's podcast is a special episode in honor of National Coming Out Day. My guest today is 81-year-old Michigan writer Jim Gerardi, author of Jerome, a gay coming-of-age story. Jim didn't come out himself to his parents until he was 39 years old in the 1970s. It was more or less common before the 1970s for gay men not to come out to their families. If the families knew, no one said anything. That could go on for years and often did. If you had a partner, which Jim did at age 39, the partner was called your friend. Some of the older members of the family, like aunts and uncles and grandparents, thought of you as a bachelor or confirmed bachelor, and everyone let it go at that. Then the gay movement's come out of the closet push took place, which made Jim rethink the friend and bachelor dodge, and he came out to his family. Luckily, they were fine with it. They treated his partner as one of the family. But what has gay life been like for him as an older adult? Jim joins me today to discuss how things have changed for him and around him, as well as what's led him to publish his book, A Searing Story of Two Teenage Boys and a Girl Seeking Their Sexual Identities in an Era Now Remembered as the Fabulous 50s. At 17, Jerome Laurentino faces the dilemma familiar to every LGBTQ youth, to every gender, whether how and when to tell mom and dad. But for Jerry, it's the 1950s. No internet, no visible gay rights movement, no TV programs with gay characters. He's alone, he's scared, but he has a plan, a wild and crazy plan, and the will to carry it out. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Joe. It's good to be here.
It's great to be here. I think, for full disclosure, we should let people know we're friends. We've been friends for 20 years.
Indeed.
And I have valued your friendship for a long time.
Thank you. And the same.
Yeah.
For sure.
Good. All right. So why don't we just start? My first question to you would be, when did you first realize that you were gay and what triggered that realization?
It really hit me at age 16. Before then, I had been, going back to 7th and 8th grade, I had been attracted to certain boys in class and so on, but I didn't really think about it or attach a label to it or kind of internalize it at all. But at 16, I literally woke up one morning and knew that I was homosexual, which was the word we used in those days. Mm-hmm. It was like, oh, this is what I am, kind of thing. And I knew.
How did you think that happened?
I really don't know. I literally woke up with that thought on my mind. It was so striking that the rest of the day, I remember I was at school. I went around in a fog at school because it had just hit me that hard. And along with it was a feeling that I was supposed to be that way too. I mean, it was kind of a certitude, that I was on a path I was supposed to be on, and this was it. I cannot answer that question. Mm-hmm. I wish I knew.
I've always loved your story and different things you've said because I always think to myself, you're 81, so back then, when you were 16, what year was it?
That would have been about 1954, 55.
Yeah, so I mean, nobody was saying that word anywhere, and
well, they were, but in negative ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Okay. So then that had to be what you were living with that day too, is here you knew you were homosexual and it had to be a very negative feeling, no?
No, it wasn't actually. It was not. Mm-hmm. I have to say, I did not have any conflict about it. I didn't have any regret about it. I didn't have oh my God, how this happened sort of thing. Nothing like that. It was just, oh, this is who I am. And that's what I lived with for that whole day. And then after that, the realization about how I came to realize that this was a negative thing as far as the world was concerned. That all came in time.
And how so? Can you speak to that?
Yeah. I think maybe the first time I heard the word queer was from my older brother and his friends joking around about people. And listening to them, it kind of dawned on me what it meant, what the word queer meant. And it was, in those days, it was not just a neutral label. It was an insult. And then we had a lot of magazines and newspapers in the house, and they were not devoid of news about homosexuals. I mean, there was a lot of news about them. For one thing, President Eisenhower, I think it was in 1955, issued a presidential order that all gay employees of the State Department would be fired herewith, and they were.
Oh, my God.
That was a huge thing in those days. That was a big story in the paper. And then there were routine local things. For example, you'd see pictures in the paper of gay men being loaded into police wagons after a raid on a gay bar, or as the newspaper called them, homo bars, and carted off to the precinct for booking. Their names would be published, their pictures would be published in the paper. So, I got the idea definitely that this was not something the world looked favorably on.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember that was all kind of outside of me. I lived in kind of a middle to upper middle class bubble, going to Catholic schools and everything. So it didn't impinge on my life, but it was there. I saw it, I got it.
This is what I've always liked about talking with you, is learning about different eras, right? Because I didn't know that there was so much talk. I thought it was just invisible. And if there was any talk, it was tiny little articles, but it wasn't.
No, not at all. Things happened. 10 years later, we had Stonewall. Really, you can go. Every era had its gay story. In the 70s, it was Leonard Matlovich, the Air Force guy, who volunteered to be a test case before the courts as to whether the military could let people go just for being homosexual. Oh, that was another thing. I joined the National Guard while I was in college. I joined at the age of 18, and one of the boxes you had to check off was, "Are you a homosexual?" And of course, I had to check no, or I wouldn't have gotten in. And, so. Yeah, all that was going on. I'm
really glad you were bringing that up, because people today say, I teach that you shouldn't be using the word homosexual because this has a negative connotation. Younger millennial gays and younger don't agree with that. And they feel like you go ahead and use it. But they were never asked, are you a known homosexual and dishonorably discharged from the military, right?
Right.
Or blamed for the hate crime that was committed. I mean, that does still happen today.
Sure.
But it's just a different – so people will say when you're heterosexual, they're heterosexual. Why? Heterosexual is not a bad word. Why is homosexual? This is why.
Well, it's considered today I think people think of it as more of a medical term, kind of a diagnostic term that was used by Freud originally. It's an old term going way back. I really avoid it. I'm glad gay came along. Although when it did, we thought it sounded funny, almost a little silly, because it meant funny, it meant joyful in a kind of playful way. And it took a while to get used to that, but actually it turned out to be a very good thing.
Oh my God, I'm just loving this conversation. We've never talked about any of this, you and me.
Right.
But just to think that you were around when gay came out, right? And then you had to get used to that word.
Exactly.
I've had to get used to the word queer, right? Because queer was always, like you said, so negative.
I still have a problem with that one.
It's going to beat me up, my brain still goes there.
Some of the better magazines are starting to use it more routinely now, and that helps, but still.
Yeah.
You're imprinted with whatever you learned at 16 or 17.
Yeah, our gay imprint, I guess, right?
Right, exactly.
So you were talking about those raids. Can I ask, did you ever do any cruising?
I never did. I wasn't personally inclined to do it. I was more interested in relationships and love and romance. That was just me. So I just wasn't inclined to do it. But in addition to that, I saw those things in the paper where the police raided bars. I was very aware of that. And over time learned that the police entrap people. I was the first 7 years of my working life, I was a teacher. I had to be very careful about anything like that. And I was just naturally careful about it anyway. I was not really interested in going to parks or restrooms or anything like that. But I saw the people who did do that got caught. And so that was just something I didn't do and never thought seriously of doing.
And just so people understand, that still does happen today. It's not as much as it used to. And in the 90s, when I was an early gay affirmative therapist, LGBT affirmative therapist, I used to get clients because and Jeffrey Montgomery taught me about this. He used to be with the Triangle Foundation, which is the equality for Michigan today. And he would talk about that the police had this program called Bag-a-Fag. And they would go to the public places that gay men would be at and pretend to be gay themselves. Literally, my clients would say, let them touch them so that then they could arrest them. And I used to wonder, what kind of cop is willing to do this and engage in it? You know what I mean?
Don't you wonder?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And these men's lives were destroyed, and they were in the paper, and their names would be listed, and their wives would find out. Just awful.
Yeah, very bad.
Very
bad. I don't know if it goes on in Michigan anymore.
That I don't know either.
I think sort of state by state.
And I know people listening might say, well, why are gay men going to public places anymore when they don't necessarily need to?
I asked Jeff Montgomery that. I said, we're spending a lot of money to defend folks who are doing this over and over again, knowing that the police are doing. There are a lot of ins and outs, yeses and nos on it, good and bad, but the fact is the police should not have been doing that.
No. Right. There should have been a different way.
Right.
And, back then.
And there are different ways. Yeah.
Plenty now,
Yeah.
right? But, a lot of other people, even today, but back then, they didn't want to go into a gay bar. They didn't see themselves as gay. They didn't, it's a whole different podcast, right? Or their culture, or their religion or whatever. So a quick hookup and then go home is like it didn't happen. And it was compartmentalized. We're lucky that we didn't have to live that way, you and I.
Very.
So let's talk about, let's talk a little bit about your job. So what was it like? You came out to your family later, but what about work?
It was never a problem at work because I never talked about it. Certainly in teaching, I didn't. And then when I left teaching and went into the business world, I just didn't talk about it. If there were social events that involved wives or bringing women to them, I just didn't go. And it was a big company. I worked for a large insurance company, so that was not a problem. But basically, I just didn't. I didn't talk about it really until the 80s when the coming out movement started. And even then, I didn't talk about it, but I didn't hide it either. When friends at work, people I was close to would talk about what they were doing for the weekend or for the summer or whatever, I'd talk about my partner and I.
You would say that?
His name, yeah.
Okay.
My partner, Doug, and I were going. These were people I trusted. I didn't say it to just anybody, but people I knew and liked and had socialized with as well as working with.
Did you feel bad about that? Not telling back then?
Geez, I can't remember if I had an emotion about it. I just did what was the appropriate thing to do, or I thought was at the time. That was it.
See, I used to feel angry in the 80s when I was coming out. My sister had this boyfriend and always welcome at the dinner table and, could talk about him. And I remember thinking, fuck that. I'm sorry I did. I'm like, I'm not living differently than her just because I'm gay and can't. And so if she had a boyfriend, I would talk about mine. If she brought someone home, I'd bring someone home. So I had I was a little more angry about it, I think.
Oh, no.
It was in my face.
Why not? It is unfair. There's no doubt about it. I didn't put two and two together like that in our house, but I can see where somebody could and would.
And, the old me used to think that you didn't was internalized homophobia. I would have labeled it right away. I don't see it that way anymore. It's a generational thing. It's a religious thing. It's a cultural thing. I get it now. Remember, I used to say this to you.
I know. I let it pass.
I know. I'm so sorry. I was just so militant.
No problem.
I've changed. Okay, so let's talk about your book, Jerome, Gay Coming of Age Story. What made you write this book?
It didn't start as a book. It started as a short story. My career was in business writing. I wrote speeches and annual reports and so on. And when I retired, I thought, and I think a lot of business writers go through this, I wonder if I could write fiction. I wonder if I have the talent to do that or the ability to do that. And I thought, I'll just do a short story. I've got the time now, 10 pages. If it has a plot, a beginning, a middle, and an end, I'll be happy. I'll toss it in the basket and forget about it. Check that off my to-do list. So I did. But the problem was when I got to page 10, that was then turned to page 15, 20, 30. It just grew. In a sense, the characters told me what they wanted to do next. It was in my own mind, but it kind of worked that way, oddly. And so I would write it down and it just grew. And finally I had over 250 pages.
Wow.
So I was able to call that a novel, and I showed it to some people and they said, they really approved, they liked it and encouraged me to get it published. I didn't get it published. I got it printed, maybe 10 copies at a time, and gave it to anybody who wanted it. But it's now on Amazon.
Which I'm so happy for you about.
Thank you.
Right, because it should be available to everybody who wants to read it.
Thanks.
And it's just like you said, it's because I've been reading it, and it does talk about Detroit. If you're from Detroit, you remember places, or actually some of the places I don't remember what they were, but I didn't know about. And the streets and then it reminds you of what the 50s were like.
Oh yeah.
You really did a good job.
There were some kind of neat things about the 50s. They had their problems, God knows, but there were some fun things about it. One thing I try to make clear to everybody about the book is that even though it's written in the first person, the main character speaks throughout it as I. It isn't me.
Oh, I was going to make sure of that. Okay.
It's not an autobiography.
You're not Jerome.
It's me. I'm not. His life, my life as an adolescent was much calmer and less dramatic than his. Jerome has problems that I didn't have, but that's one of the reasons it was fun writing that book. I was able to get myself into his predicament and try to get him out of it.
What do you think?
Let him try to get out of it.
Yeah. What made you think about creating that kind of character?
Yeah, I don't know.
Was in you.
I don't know where he came from. I really don't. It wasn't me. It was just he was just there.
Yeah, he's very vivid. It's very good.
Thank you.
So can you tell us how long were you in your relationship?
With Doug?
Yes.
23 years.
23 years. How'd you meet him?
We were introduced by a fellow I was seeing at the time. We weren't really in a relationship. We dated a couple times. I think we both knew it wasn't working out too well. But anyway, we all met with some friends at a club one Saturday night, and he brought a friend of his who happened to be Doug. And while we were sitting around during the evening having drinks, Doug asked me to dance. And you could still slow dance in those days. I don't think you can do that now in bars, but you could then. And
in gay bars?
Yeah.
Oh, I can't even imagine
clubs.
slow dance in a gay bar.
They would alternate the music.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
that's nice.
If you were with somebody you wanted to be with, it was kind of nice. You know? Anyway, so he asked me to dance not just once or twice, but 3 or 4 times. And, that was it. I mean, we just got along, and we were together for 2 decades after that.
And was it hard? Like, you've said to me over the years, you felt it might be easier to be gay and openly gay and in a relationship back in the older days because people didn't think about it, right?
Well, I call it flying under the radar. And in that sense, it was easier. It's much better today. I would never want to go back, anybody to go back to those days.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you could do that. I mean, if your family is saying, oh, he's a confirmed bachelor, and they're calling your partner your friend, I know I had my very best friend did that right through his whole life until he died. He never did tell his parents.
Oh, yeah.
So you could do that. I also moved away from home, and I moved downtown, got my own apartment. And so the family wasn't there to see me. I could do what I wanted and go where I wanted. I made new friends, both gay and straight. So that's what I call it, flying under the radar.
Right.
In that sense, nobody talked about it in those days. Polite people did not talk about
that. Would just
or any sex thing. So you could just do what you wanted to do.
What do you think would have happened if you did talk about it?
People would be very uncomfortable, and they would just sort of look away. Yeah, and it would just be ghastly.
Yeah, right.
I just didn't do it.
Right. I totally understand that, because if it was going to change the tone of the tenor of your relationship,
and it could change your relationship too.
Yeah,
you're right. So just avoided that.
Yeah, I don't blame you. And then, can you talk a little bit about things have changed, right? So you went from a young man to a middle-aged man, and now an older adult. Right. What has that been like as a gay man? And what changes have you seen?
Well, there are negatives to it. I mean, I think that it's, we all know that in the gay community, there are 2 currencies that are very valuable, youth and looks. And as you age, whatever looks you had, if you had any, you lose them. And obviously your age is your age.
Yes.
You can't do anything about that. So I think it makes it tougher to date and to meet people and to form relationships. I don't date anymore at this point. I did up until about the age of 75. But I don't now. My social life centers on my friends, both gay and straight. Go out to lunch, go out to dinner, go over to their homes. They come to mine. We do things. But that's where I center my life now. And I'm not really in gay life anymore as such.
Does that bother you? Do you just adapted to it?
It's just what it is. And I don't regret it or have any profound feelings about it. My life I like my life the way it is. It's satisfying. I'm able to see my friends and do things. And
right. You have a good life.
I do. Do I miss romance? Yes. Do I miss having somebody to love and to be loved by? Yes, I do. But I'm 81.
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
Well, and people may ask, if you don't mind me asking, what happened to your relationship?
Well, Doug died.
Yeah, right.
In 1997. He was a great guy. He was a very strong man. He had fought for years to maintain his health in the face of a blood disease that was incurable called polycythemia. And he did. He managed it very well with the help of good doctors. But in the end, it got him, and he died in his 60s in 1997. So,
and then after that, it probably took you a while to, grieve and, right? I mean,
maybe 2 years.
Yeah, right.
Before I really sort of came out of that stage. And
what's crazy to me is there's only one book, and it's out of print, for male relationships where one dies. It's called Gay Widowers, Michael Chernoff.
I've never even heard of it.
Yeah, now he's even deceased. But I wrote about it I reviewed it, and there's stories of gay men and what happened and how you went through it. And it's a good book, What would you say is wisdom that you have I know you have lots of wisdom, so people don't know because we've been friends for a long time. That I've always looked at you as for wisdom. And I used to call you my gay elder, and you used to hate that. And now that I'm an elder, I hate it too. So I completely understand.
One day, Joe, we're going to have to own it. Right?
I know. Well, older adult. That's what they say now.
Yeah,
they don't even say seniors.
But that's sort of that's a workaround.
I know
too.
It is a workaround, but
old,
I like it.
Right?
I know. No,
I'm old. You're not old.
No,
yet.
we're both. Sorry. Yeah. But I've always looked to you for wisdom, and I've always said to you, what do you think about this? Plus, your life has been less dramatic than mine. You're more calm, and I have all this drama going. What would you say is the biggest kinds of wisdoms you want to tell people?
Well, nobody's ever asked me. I've never had young people come to me and say, "Oh, wise one, what do you think I should do about this or that?" Never. But if I had to talk to anybody, whether gay or straight, young or old, I would just say there are just three things. And one of them is to be proud of who you are as a gay person, be honest and generous in your relationships, and be kind to people. I just think those are the three things, no matter who you are or what your station in life is. If you do those three, you're going to be happier with yourself as a person.
Which I think you are all three of those things over the 20 years I've known you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really have appreciated your friendship.
It's a daily effort.
Yeah, all right. I know it's an effort for all of us, especially when people aren't that way back to us, right?
It happens.
I'm so glad you were on here, and I'm so glad you talked about Jerome, your book. Where can people find it again?
Well, it is on Amazon. You do have to, if you go there, you have to input. That's the title of the book is simply Jerome, but to get it on the website, you do have to input Jerome, a gay coming of age story. And we had to do that because if you just input Jerome, you get a whole bunch of books by people whose name is Jerome. And you can't see the book you're looking for. So
that makes sense.
Put that other part.
And they can put your name in, and your name will be on the website. So that's right. If they put in Jim Gerardi,
James Gerardi.
Oh, James.
Jerome by James Gerardi brings it up too. But either way.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Yeah, it was. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Smart Sex, Smart Love. I'm Dr. Joe Kort, and you can find me on joekort.com. That's JOEKORT.com. See you next time.